And bear with me, guys. Let's see, is that? There we go. All right. So today, I want to talk about public narrative and how we as the CC can be leaders for social change by telling our story, and that being the story of UAEM, our personal stories as leaders, and the stories of what we hope to achieve in the future. This is a framework that I heavily borrowed um, from a professor named Marshall Gaines. I think professor is the wrong word. He's an activist. He's involved in kind of political communications, but he's developed a few frameworks for how organizations can well organize and how they can tell effective stories to mobilize people into action. And so a quick brief overview. I'm going to be going over leadership, talking about how leadership is a form of storytelling, or sorry, how storytelling is a form of leadership. I guess it works both ways. Then I'm going to get into a short storytelling 101. What does it mean to tell a good story? Then how do we tell a public narrative? That being, how do we tell our stories as leaders? And then fourth, I need your guys' help on the social media. I want to revamp the social media with this idea of public narrative. And I'd love to get your input and hopefully some statements from you guys about your own stories that we can kind of throw on there. And then finally, how you might be able to translate these lessons to your chapters. And so first, how is storytelling a form of leadership? First, I want to define a definition of leadership that we can maybe work with. I'm thinking of leadership as accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. I think key here is that a leader is creating purpose. They're taking their organization, their constituency, and finding a way to get them to feel motivated to pursue an end goal under conditions of uncertainty. When things are certain, you don't really need a leader. It's when things are uncertain that a leader is needed most. And so how do you actually do that? How do you move people to action? Gaines provides a framework of three main things that you need. You need to lead with the head, lead with the heart, and lead with your hands. Head is a strategy, kind of what we've been doing on a week to week, and I'm sure what you guys are doing in your breakout CC calls. Action is the actual campaigns, whether that be the report card, whether that be kind of student protests on campus, the white papers that we might put out. But narrative is kind of the heart. It kind of instills the why we're doing what we're doing. It affects affect, it's pathos, it's motivation. It motivates others to move into action, which in and of itself is like not that easy. And I'm sure you guys have run into this. I was just at our EC bazaar, our extracurricular bazaar, where there were hundreds and hundreds of students passing by. And I would ask them, do you guys care, or not, do you guys care about, access to medicines, but um, is health policy important to you? Do you think the university should better license its medications? And most people are like, yeah, that seems cool, but that's not really what I'm interested in. And I think that once I started learning to hone my story, that's when people are like, wow, I'm actually kind of seeing the vision. I'm seeing the motivation, and this is something I'd love to be a part of. And so a helpful way to think about how to inspire people into action is to remember that a key to motivation is understanding that values inspire action through emotion. So you have, let's say, a value, and that value kind of surfaces as an emotional response, which moves you into action. Um, if there are any psychologists in this call, please don't fact check me. I don't know if this kind of meets the rigors of modern day psychology. But for the sake of organizing, I think that this is a very helpful framework for thinking about how stories can kind of mediate between values and action. And how they can is, well, I think that narrative, or Gaines thinks that narrative, allows us to communicate the emotional content of our values. So going back a slide, emotions kind of, stories kind of bring out our values while in the sense almost instilling values in others. Um, there's a lot of cool theories about how we're always taught as kids through stories, like the Aesop's fables, because they instill in us what normatively should be correct, how we should be acting stories teach us lessons, which kind of instill values, such that the next time we might, I don't know, think about making porridge, we'll know to get it just right because we have that kind of value of like practicality. Um, and the interesting thing in all of this is something that I was wondering as I was kind of looking through Gaines's framework is like, why don't we just say our values directly? Like, why do I need to like tell a story to convey values through emotions? Well, this is kind of an age-old lesson. It's always better to show as opposed to tell. Um, Stories just have a way of captivating. And I think my speculation is that it allows us, I think stories are a form of empathy. They allow us to get into the shoes of the protagonist or the narrator to understand what this world is like and for us to better grapple with the challenges that the protagonist is going through. And so, as I've kind of tried to establish how stories can lead, these stories are a form of leadership. Um, Now I want to get into how to actually tell a story. How do you now mobilize values and actions into collective action? Um, and so the three main characteristics of a story is, well, one, the plot; second, the character, a protagonist; and third, a moral. Moral doesn't have to be some like grand overarching like kind of truism, but it can just be like the point of the story. Like when you're at a party and someone's going on and on and on and on and on about a story, you just want to get to the point. There should be a point to the story. And when we're looking at the plot first, there are three main kind of um, portions of plot. This first, a challenge. What was the challenge? How did it feel like? And again, this is really focused on the character. How did the character experience this challenge internally? And then how did they then make a choice? How did they get the courage to act in the face of difficulty? And what was their logic? What were their emotions that they were feeling? And where did they get hope from? And how did it feel? In stories, it's always important to get, the key, small, specific stories that really bring a story to life, that really allows you to feel like you're there. And then finally, there's the outcome. How did it end up? Why did things end up that way? And now what do we learn from that? What is the moral? And I think a way to maybe explain this a little bit better is to think about like the story of UAM. We had Amy in 2001 who confronted a challenge. Doctors Without Borders in South Africa wanted to buy D4T, but was unable to because of a patent held by Yale and Bristol Myers Squibb. So then Amy had a choice, and Amy's choice, after much deliberation, or probably not after much deliberation, I think Amy's mind was already set, was to launch a campaign. What if we got Yale and Bristol Myers Squibb to relinquish their patent in sub-Saharan Africa, such that the 28 million people in Africa then could be able to access a life-saving treatment? And the outcome of all of this was, well, the patent on D4T was relaxed. And the moral, I think one of the points of the story is, well, one, universities have a strong foothold in global health. The way a university licenses its medical research directly impacts how patients are able to access it in the back end. And the moral kind of here is actually, in a sense, UAM. UAM was founded at the outset of kind of as this whole debacle was unwinding. And as Amy and other students who were involved were beginning to think about how this problem is kind of recurrent. This could happen at any university that's licensing out their medicines with a priority of stakeholder maximization as opposed to kind of meeting global health needs. And so now that I've gone through, hopefully, and convinced you that storytelling is a form of leadership. Storytelling is how you lead with the heart. It's how you motivate people. And how to tell a story at that. Now, how do we tell stories as a form of leadership? How do we tell our public narrative to do all the things that I promised that storytelling can do? And Gaines's framework here is something called public narrative. It's the narrative we tell to the public. It starts out, and Justin, I'll let you jump in just a sec. It starts out in kind of three phases. It can be thought of as the acronym SUN. It's the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. The story of self is the story of our leaders. It's the story of why I have been called to leadership. It's the story of why you have been called to leadership. And then the story of us is like, what is UAEM? What do we believe in? What experiences do we share that kind of create our community, that creates a group of students who continue to want to change the cultures of university licensing? And once we've established kind of our ethos there, our credibility, we then get to the story of now. Why do we need to act now? Um, Storytelling, I think, is a great way to overcome the inertia I think most people feel of moving into action. Most people who are, walking by the extracurricular bazaar aren't necessarily like thinking about launching into some sort of great campaign. But the story of now, the Ozempic costs $1,300 in the US when it costs $50 in Germany, and it can completely, decimate the Medicare, Medicaid budgets if we were to start covering it, which in ways we should, because it's an important medication that a lot of people need. That kind of urgency, after having conveyed our beliefs, who we are, can then start to work in this whole public narrative where we start to kind of cast ourselves in a light that I believe can motivate people into action. And so I'm going to hand it off to Justin to kind of give us a quick demo on what a public narrative might look like. So everyone, Justin Mendoza, a round of applause.
Thank you for the applause. In 2019, my father passed away at the age of 63, far too young from heart failure. And if if you just stop the story there, you would think, oh, this is yet another person, yet another Latino male who died early because of overeating or sugar sweetened foods or something like that, if you have a public health background. But his story actually starts 11 years earlier. In 2008, he lost his job. He was working for a manufacturing company that provided health insurance for every member of our family. And that year, he also had his first chronic infection. It was cellulitis, an infection in his legs that was caused by bad circulation. With no health insurance, he went to the hospital for 3 days to treat an acute infection. And that one hospital visit and the medicines prescribed for that hospital visit resulted in tens of thousands of dollars in medical debt. For the next 11 years, my dad didn't go back to a hospital. And during that time, I graduated high school, and I had already seen when I was graduating high school the importance and what it looks like to fall through the cracks in a healthcare system in this country, and what it looks like to not get the care that you need. My father went from being a super active, super fun-loving guy to a guy who was miserable and in pain for most of the time that that I was going into college. That led me to choose to study medicine, to go into the track of trying to understand the issues in society that could lead to someone like my dad landing where he was, and could lead to so many other stories in my community, in small towns all across the United States, in the wealthiest nation in the world. How do people fall through the cracks in healthcare? And led me to discover organizations fighting for justice like Universities Allied for Essential Medicines. UAEM at the time was working on international trade, working on connecting students to organizations all over the world fighting for justice. And I heard stories like my dad's story. This is years before he passed away, but I heard stories of people whose families couldn't get the care that they needed, who could not afford to my phone's going off, could not afford to purchase their medicines, or live in countries where medicines that treat the diseases affecting themselves or their families did not even exist. And that inspired me to work with UAEM, this organization, to fight for a better and more just world, to see that we could actually change something and push our administrations, push the policymakers around us, and use our power to change the way that medicines are afforded, that health equity works, and that our systems really work to define healthcare across the country and across the world. And now, today, we know that policymakers are paying attention to these issues in a way that they've never paid attention before. Because of the work of UAM and this whole movement for access to medicines, here in the United States, we actually negotiate prescription drug prices after 30 years of just letting that go. Here, we actually see challenges to the patent system. We actually see a conversation about health equity, and we're pushing every single day to make sure that none of the pressure drops off. Because if we let it drop, there will be millions more people like my father who lose their lives too early simply because the system was broken around them.
Thanks, Justin. And thank you for showing how well a public narrative can work, how we can understand a little bit more about you, your organization, and what your organization means to you, and why that's important now, and why we should, well, I'm thinking, oh no, I'm thinking last week to, uh, oh, that ruined it. I'm thinking last week to our signings of the kind of petitions to stop the negotiations against the IRA, and how that can be a kind of a way to frame that story. For this next slide, there was supposed to be animations, which is supposed to make it a lot better. But in any sense, I wanted to give a little bit of a flip side of the public narrative, kind of to show how it can be a little bit adapted to your needs, such that when I was a kid, I was a Pokemon kid. I used to spend every single day playing on my DS, playing Pokemon, playing Mario Kart. I felt that growing up, I pretty much grew up on video games. And I think as I grew a little bit older, I started connecting with people more through social media. And I was kind of, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was the kid who would go onto Instagram and I would basically just take memes from Instagram and just repost them into Discords. Like that was like my favorite thing to do growing up. And I was just like a hardcore gamer. Um, and so as I kind of moved through college, those kind of um, interests took kind of a backseat to my interest in medicine at the time. And once I found UAEM, I was really interested in how this movement has mobilized students from starting with just a few Yale students all the way up to kind of an entire international community of students who are advocating for um, changes in how universities license their patents. And I was thinking this entire time is like I want, digital communities I felt as a kid to be part of like UAM. I want people to feel as connected with technology as I did when I was 5 years old. And so that's why I joined the communications team. And today we are in a desperate, dire need to revamp the social media. I think you guys have been seeing the social media. I've noticed that a lot of you haven't been liking our posts. I don't take too much offense to that. But we need some help to start revamping how we kind of push our public narrative on social media. I believe that I think that our Instagram can be a great way to highlight our community members, people in chapters around the country, the work that we're doing, the values that motivate us, along with being kind of like informational with a lot of infographics as it kind of stands now. And so as a part of that, the first thing I want to ask you guys to do is to do a think, pair, share. I want each of you to take a few seconds to think about what your story of self is. What motivated you to come to kind of join UAIM, to take up a leadership role in UAIM. Do something like what Justin did. Don't do something like what I just did a few minutes ago with my story of self. And so please take a few minutes to just think about what your story of self would be. I'm going to time it at 5 minutes. Afterwards, we'll pair you with 2 or 3 other CC members so that you can share your stories and then maybe be able to workshop them with each other. And then finally, hopefully we can come back together and take 1 to 2 examples as a group. And my hope is that within the next week, we can all record all of these stories of self and then be able to post them on social media as our proper launch of the new CC. There hasn't been a post yet about who the new CC is. And as opposed to doing just a carousel of a bunch of images and like, this is where I'm from, and this is like a, quick blurb of why I joined UAIM, I'd love to do a video so that everyone can kind of get to know you guys a little bit better. And so I think for the think phase, how about we do this? For the next 5 minutes, please turn your cameras off and I'm going to stop sharing, or I'll keep the share up. I'll go back to the story of self if that might be of any help. But for the next 5 minutes, turn your cameras off and just think about what your story of self is, what motivated you to join UAIM, and we'll convene shortly after. All right, everyone, that's been about 5 minutes. Justin, would you be able to help me sort everyone out into a breakout room?